How much money do you need to retire? You've probably seen answers ranging from 10 times your salary to 25 times your annual expenses. You may have heard that retirement income should replace about 80% of what you earned while working. These are all legitimate planning shortcuts, but they're not answering exactly the same question. So which number should you actually use? While this shouldn't be considered individual financial advice, I hope this video will help you figure that out. If you're new here, I'm Eric, and this channel covers topics related to approaching retirement that tend to cause anxiety. How much money do you need? How to access your retirement accounts before age 59 and a half? What are your options for healthcare before age 65? I retired 3 years ago at 54, and in that time, I've seen a lot of conflicting and sometimes downright wrong info out there. The simplest shortcut for figuring out how much you need is the income replacement rule. The Department of Labor says, quote-unquote, experts commonly estimate that retirees will need roughly 70 to 90% of their pre-retirement income in order to maintain their standard of living. Well, that's nice and specific. 80% is often used as the middle-of-the-road estimate, and 80% does sound good, until two households with the same income compare their lives. So if a household earns $100,000 before retirement, the shortcut suggests it may need about $80,000 per year after retiring. Why less than the full salary? Well, some expenses disappear. The big ones tend to be that you're no longer contributing to retirement accounts. Payroll taxes, also known as FICA, also disappear when you stop working. A mortgage might be paid off, and the kids might be out of college. Some people will have in-office costs that disappear, commuting, work clothes, and other job-related costs. But the 80% rule can also be badly off. It's very broad, and we each have individual needs. Someone that saves a large percentage of their income may need far less than 80%. Another household may need almost all of its previous income because it expects more travel, higher healthcare costs, or they're increasing support for family members. Salary is easy to identify, but salary is not the same as spending. You may also have noticed that the income replacement method is a bit hand-wavy. Honestly, vague answers for financial planning is one of the reasons why I started this channel. That's why the better method, especially when retirement is getting close, starts with expected expenses. But while it is the better method, there is more involved. And confronting spending can sometimes be uncomfortable and involve confronting some personal decisions. Begin with what your household actually spends now. Then remove costs that should end and add costs that may begin or increase, including ordinary expenses such as housing, food, utilities, transportation, insurance, and entertainment. Also be sure to include taxes, healthcare premiums, home repairs, vehicle replacement, and other irregular expenses that don't arrive neatly every month. The part where people tend to get frustrated and throw up their hands is future expenses. It doesn't have to be perfect. The point is to deliberately think about what your life may be like, and if that phase of your life is likely to have larger expenses from travel, healthcare, or hobbies. Once you have a total, subtract reliable income that does not have to come from the investment portfolio. That includes Social Security, a pension, rental income, or even an annuity. We'll work through an example, but first, if this is useful, consider subscribing to the channel. I cover topics related to the decisions we all need to make as we approach retirement, so subscribe to stay aware of new content. Suppose a couple expects to spend $80,000 per year, including any taxes. They estimate that Social Security and a pension will provide $45,000. Their savings does not need to produce the full $80,000. It only needs to cover the $35,000 gap. In both cases, we've seen how much the person needs annually, but how do we use that to determine how much we need to save? Some very smart financial advisors analyzed what worked and what didn't over a long haul. While I have videos diving deeper into the details, the short answer for this video is that someone who saves 25 times their annual need and invests in a mix of bonds and broad index securities has a low chance of running out of money. This is called the 4% rule. Under the 4% approach, You divide the needed portfolio income by 4% or simply multiply it by 25. 35,000 multiplied by 25 equals $875,000. That does not mean $875,000 is guaranteed to be enough. It's a planning benchmark, not a promise. The 4% rule came from historical research on withdrawals, using a diversified stock and bond portfolio over a 30-year retirement. But it does allow for cost of living increases. You take your starting number, 35K in this case, and each year increase it by the inflation rate for the year. A more cautious assumption produces a larger savings target. At a 3.3% starting withdrawal rate, or multiplying times 30 rather than 25, the same $35,000 income gap requires a bit over $1 million. Yeah, caution has always had expensive taste, but if you're planning more than 30 years, especially 40 or 45, you may want the additional caution. On the other side, at a 5% starting withdrawal rate, it only requires $700,000, but the risk of exhausting the portfolio early is higher. The projected withdrawal rate is therefore not just arithmetic. It reflects retirement length, investment mix, inflation rate, spending flexibility, and how much margin you want, how much safety. A third planning method is to use a retirement calculator or a financial planning model. These tools can incorporate inflation, investment returns, taxes, Social Security timing, pensions, and life expectancy. More advanced models run many possible market sequences instead of assuming one steady return. That can be very useful, but the output is only as good as the assumptions. A calculator that says you have a 90% probability of success isn't saying that your retirement is 90% certain. It is saying the plan succeeds in 90% of the modeled scenarios with the inputs you supplied. It's also important to identify where it failed. A plan that tends to run out of money in years 15 to 18 out of a 30-year retirement has flaws. A plan that only fails near the end of the modeled period likely just needs a bit of flexibility built in, things that can be dropped in a severe downturn. Most of us realize that if the market drops by a large margin, we really shouldn't keep spending like a sailor on shore leave. We're going to cut back on some things. The most practical approach is to use the methods in stages. Early in your career, an income replacement target or a salary multiple may be good enough to tell whether you're broadly on track. As retirement gets closer, replace that shortcut with a more detailed spending estimate. Subtract expected Social Security and pensions, apply a reasonable withdrawal rate to the remaining gap, and then stress test the result with different assumptions. Finally, add a bit of a margin for the things the model can't predict precisely. That does not necessarily mean accumulating another $1 million, although a financial advisor paid by how much you invest with them will certainly approve of that option. Instead, it might mean having a flexible spending category, working part-time, or maintaining cash for near-term expenses. You need enough margin to survive imperfect assumptions, not enough to survive every financial event ever imagined. There's no universal retirement number because there's no universal retirement household. The useful number isn't based on what your neighbor saved or what an online headline says you should have. It's based on the life you expect to live, the reliable income you're going to receive, and the amount your investments need to supply.